This is the Fifth Estate winning headlines, your media police post. Brought to you by the Fort Hall School of Government, coming to you from Nairobi, Kenya. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you might have missed this morning. But we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 1st of April, 2020, and I am 2J.
I'm 2M.
And I am JM. In case you missed the headlines this morning, here they are. In the Daily Nation, virus, keep your distance to stay safe. In the Standard, Bishop who fought for Kenyans. And in the Star, taking time bomb as coronavirus spreads to health workers.
Wow.
Yes.
So today we want to put the headlines aside and instead talk about coronavirus in light of a framework known as the Rumsfeld submission.
Yes.
So we'd like to apply the Rumsfeld predictive model to break down the coronavirus. And this model was developed by former US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. It advances from three assumptions. First are the known knowns. These are the things that we know that we know.
Yes.
They are facts that we are certain of, and they are in the public domain.
Yes.
Then we have the known unknowns. These are the things that we know, but whose outcomes we do not know. For example, we know that we are going to die. What we don't know is when we're going to die.
Yes.
And finally, we have the unknown unknowns. These are extreme and seemingly unrelated events which tend to occur suddenly during times of crisis, such as the COVID-19 crisis.
Yes.
So, what are the known knowns?
So I will start with the known knowns, the things that we know that we know. However, in this context, I'm going to be very cautious about how I refer to some of these things, and I think you'll understand why.
Yeah.
So firstly, one thing that we do know is that COVID-19 is in Kenya. We know that is a fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
We know that it has reached the level of human-to-human transmission at a community level. I think
Yes.
I mentioned this yesterday.
Yeah.
Previously, it was an imported disease. A lot of the cases were imported, coming in through flights.
Yes.
But now we know that they're being transmitted human-to-human on the community local level.
Yes.
The next thing we know is that there are confirmed 59 cases. There could be other cases, but 59 have been confirmed. There has been one confirmed death as well. The other deaths we may not know about if they do exist. And lastly, what we also know is that there are two recovered patients.
Yeah.
They refer to Brenda and Brian. Brenda being patient 0 and Brian being patient number 3. We know that they have recovered.
Yeah.
However, there could be other people who came into contact with the virus that recovered at home, not knowing that they even had it at all.
Correct.
We know that the confirmed counties are Nairobi, Kwale, Kilifi, and Kajiado.
Yeah.
However, it could be in other counties. We do not know that yet.
Yes.
We know the capacity of our hospitals, and we also know how many ventilators exist in the country.
Yes.
Those are the things that we know because they are in the public domain.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, for example, we know that if we have and we discussed this yesterday, if we have a shortage of ICU, critical care facilities,
Yes.
if we have a shortage of ventilators, then we know that the worst hit, the people who are going to be worst hit, are those who will require
Yes.
those facilities if they do get COVID-19.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which will be really tragic.
Yeah, would be
So,
Absolutely.
so there's also things that we don't know, right? Things that, and these are the known unknowns.
Yeah.
Things that we know only partially. So data, for example, data from other countries suggests that after a country registers its 100th case,
Yeah.
COVID-19 cases multiply exponentially by a bigger and bigger factor every day. But what we do not know is whether our exponential growth rates will look like those of Italy and the US, or whether they will be even more severe given our informal settlements and our poor sanitation and hygiene infrastructure.
Yeah.
We also know that the average fatality rate is about 3%.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this may or may not be the case for us.
Yeah.
And that is because countries are affected differently depending on their health capabilities, but more importantly, their demographic breakdown.
Yes.
So countries like Italy and Spain, where 20% of the population is above the age of 65, have had death rates of 10% and 9% respectively. That's quite high.
Yes, it is.
Here in Kenya, only about 7% of our population is elderly.
7%?
7%.
Wow.
Our median age is about 20. So does that mean that we won't experience such high fatality rates? I don't know. We cross our fingers.
Of course.
Another one. That we don't know. We don't know whether the government is quietly pursuing a policy of herd immunity.
Yes.
Herd immunity is where you allow the population to get the virus at large so that they can build immunity from it. And the more immunity that they build, then the safer it becomes. You basically overcome. You basically overcome that virus. Now, the downside to that is that because there's still so many unknowns about the virus, you could still have very many high death rates, and this thing could acquire a life of its own in a way that you didn't
I think
expect.
for our own safety, I really hope the government does not pursue that herd mentality. I think that would be very dangerous because we do not know what the consequences of that could be.
But let me ask, what do you expect of a government that is so poor and a government with very few options, such as Kenya? We're not Italy. We're not Germany, who can afford such superior healthcare.
So maybe one that I could propose as an unknown is that in Kenya, we know that there's a possibility that the government could put into act a state of emergency. We just do not know if it could happen. So I think that if people continue to behave, brazenly, not taking this seriously, the government could put their foot down and say, you know what, now we take full control.
Yeah. Those are the unknown unknowns. Take us through those.
Before I do unknown unknowns, I want to ask June whether the two that recovered are Kalenjin.
Why?
Are they Kalenjin, June?
I believe that one is, and I don't think that's important.
Why is that important?
I don't know. But let me do them.
All right.
Let me do the known unknowns.
The things that we do not know that we do not know.
The things that we don't know that we don't know. Right? And this for me are extremes, black swan moments that could happen. And example, Italy. Now, we know that the north of Italy is most ravaged by corona. But what we are seeing in the south of Italy is social unrest. Now, fellows are going into supermarkets and stealing. And this is because they have the country is under shutdown. And they have no other ways of making incomes. And I just want to read a phrase from an Italian priest in southern Italy that depicts the situation. He says, they are no longer singing or dancing on the balconies. Now, people are more afraid, not so much of the virus, but of poverty. Many are out of work and are hungry. Now, what the banks in southern Italy are saying is that they will not postpone any monthly payments, for example, car loans or house loans or like mortgages to people, that once you do not pay back your loans, then your asset gets attached. You basically get auctioned.
Wow.
Now, what are yes, it's very tragic. Now, what are things that could come from this that is extreme? We don't know how many people are going to die, for example, how long it will last, all right? But as well, we probably think, there's probably a situation where Kenyans may actually survive this. But I also want to go to the extreme. I also want to say that we do not know that maybe Uhuru Kenyatta did us a favor by giving us a curfew. And as I speak of Gema, because maybe Gema women are celebrating. The Wajiros and the Nyaburas are celebrating that their husbands are going to be home by 7 p.m. and this will result into a baby boom. Unknown unknowns.
Unknown unknowns. We'll continue to monitor the situation with this framework and see what we know, and there's many unknowns which are still being explored every day. So, on to the final thought. Yes. What is our final thought?
And now our final thought. It is inspired by the enforcement of martial law extremes in Egypt.
Yes. So this week we've been looking at a history of lockdowns that have existed across the globe. And I think that we want to first just look back at some of the ones that we looked at this week.
Yeah.
Because on Monday, we looked at the Spanish flu of 1918.
Yes.
And we looked at the 2 cases of St. Louis and Philadelphia, and how dealing with or enforcing social distancing can really help to stop the spread of a disease, and how those 2 cities can show us the 2 extremes of how it can go right and it can go very wrong. And then yesterday, we looked at the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. Chernobyl being a place in the Ukraine, which was a part of the former Soviet Union. And the importance of trust and transparency from governments. If the government is honest with us, then it can really help with how the populace behave. And so today, as 2M said, we're going to look at martial law and the state of emergency in Egypt. So just first, I think we should look at some definition of terms. State of emergency is a situation of national danger or disaster in which a government suspends normal constitutional procedures to regain control. And this is contrasted with the more extreme martial law, which is the imposition of direct military control of normal civilian functions by a government, especially in response to temporary emergencies such as invasion or national disaster. So most people actually don't know this, and I was very surprised to learn that Egypt has lived under some form of martial law or state of emergency since 1914. That is 106 years. So if I could just very quickly take us through a timeline of 106 years. Bear with me if I skip some details, but we need to get to the point. So Egypt experienced martial law for the first time in 1914 during World War I. In November of that year, British occupation forces imposed martial law throughout the country to protect the interests of Britain itself. So Britain did not end this martial law until 4 years after the end of World War II, which was in 1922. Then thereafter, since 1922, the country lived for 17 years without martial law until it was imposed again by the Egyptian government because of World War II in September 1939. So members of the Egyptian parliament objected to this imposition of martial law because they did not believe that Egypt was in any danger of invasion by the Axis allies. Later, however, a war broke out and the martial law was extended. And this continued until the end of 1945 when it was lifted again. It was declared again for the 3rd time in 1948 with the Arab effort to help protect the Palestinians from Israeli invasion. In 1950, the ministry headed by Mustafa El-Nahas initiated the end of the martial law, with the exception that it could be only renewed after every 1 year. But unfortunately, during that period, the revolution of 1952 broke out, and we see the martial law being imposed again. Following this, the power was concentrated in the Revolutionary Command Council. They established the martial law after the establishment of the Constitution in 1965. Then we have what we know as the Emergency Law number 162 of 1958. This is the law that still governs what happens in Egypt right now. And this was declared after 2 years by Abdul Nasser, and it was applied for the first time in 1957 during the 6-Day War. This lasted for 13 years until midnight, May 15th, 1980. And it was the longest period ever that a country has lived under martial law. So, unfortunately, during this time, we see that the state of emergency loses its legitimacy. And President Sadat at the time had no choice but to lift it. Following this, he was assassinated in 1981. And then we have Hosni Mubarak become the president. And he uses this as an excuse to reimpose it for every 3 years during the period that he was president, which was from 1981 to 2011. 2011, we all know what happens. We go into the Arab Spring. And Egypt joins the Arab Spring. And they use the state of emergency as a reason to trigger, one of the many reasons that triggered their joining it. However, this did not change much. In 2012, the military government initiates a de facto martial law, and this was in effect until the new constitution was imposed. Then we have a coup in 2013. Again, the state of emergency was reintroduced. And every year between 2013 and 2020, of course with coronavirus as well, we see the government using several reasons, terrorism, unrest, as a reason to reimpose a state of emergency. And that is a 106, never-ending state of emergency in Egypt. You know,
2J, what I can't believe is that they're still under this state of emergency today. Even after the 2011 Arab Spring, even after they revolted against that and they tossed that government out, they are still under that today. It's a confirmation of what military, what a country governed by the military looks like. And this is why Kenyans need to take their civilian government very seriously.
Very seriously.
Because life under a military government
Yeah.
is a completely different state of affairs.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll quickly talk about, however, the counter side of government being too severe on the citizens.
Yeah.
Isaac Newton told us, according to his third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Yes.
And what we saw in 2012 is the reaction of the citizens against this state of emergency in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And so the heavy-handedness of the successive Egyptian governments is partly what pushed them to the tipping point in 2011.
Yeah.
And this became one of the objects of aggression towards the government, that we've lived under this state of emergency for so long. Our freedoms have been curtailed. You know, there's really no justice, no fairness.
Yeah.
And in the book True Believer, which we've covered on this show before,
Yes.
Eric Hoffman talks about how mass movements are engineered. And he talks about people being in a state of discontentment generally for a long time.
Yeah.
He says also that when people are hopeless, they're pushed to the limit and they feel like, you know what, because we've lived under tyranny for so long, we should be able to change our state of affairs by any means necessary.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in 2011.
Yes.
And I still want to believe that that is a probability even going forward,
Yes.
considering that Egypt is still essentially under military rule.
Yes.
So for me, the state of emergency in Egypt, it doesn't really make so much sense because it's not sustainable.
No.
Because every so often you're going to have a revolt from the citizens. So I really do hope that that is not where we degenerate into
most definitely.
as a country.
Yeah.
But these are some of the unknown unknowns
Yes.
that we were talking about earlier.
Yes, absolutely.
These are the probabilities.
Yes.
If this thing acquires a life of its own and goes in a trajectory that doesn't seem to stop.
The government will be left with no choice.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are hypothetical positions as to why Egypt has had so many, state of emergencies. And one of them, in hypothetically speaking, is sibling rivalry. And this is a clash of institutions, a clash between the executive and a clash between, the executive versus the judiciary. And the judiciary in Egypt, even pre-2011, before the Arab Spring, was seen as very politically assertive and very independent of itself. And there are many instances regarding this. You see, before the year 2000, in elections in Egypt, state officials equivalent of our own IBC were the ones carrying out and overseeing elections. But the persons that were actually overseeing and monitoring the counting and tallying of elections were actually judicial officers. Now, come the year 2000, the Supreme Constitutional Court of Egypt rules that the entire process of elections in Egypt was going to be foreseen by the judiciary. Now, it is equivalent of Maraga saying, now get IBC and the Chebukati, please get away. I am going to be the IBC of elections in Kenya. But also, the lower courts were very notorious in overruling the state. So, for example, the administrative courts in Egypt had in the past obstructed border agreements with countries like Saudi Arabia. The Supreme Court, Constitutional Court, had also overturned protest laws. But no infringement was greater than that of 2013. The army then deposed Morsi, who was installed by the military after the deposing of Hosni Mubarak in 2011. Now, they suspend the constitution and then appoint the head of the Supreme Court, our equivalent of Maraga, as interim president, a man called Adil Mahmoud Mansour.
What are you trying to tell us?
What I'm trying to tell us is this. Once the judiciary has tasted blood like this, political blood, and have interfered with political processes, they will never stop. You see, there's a reason why those lions of Savo are called man-eaters of Savo. It's because they killed one guy, they tasted blood, and then
they wanted more.
They wanted
human steak. Now, what are we saying here? If if Maraga decides to dissolve parliament, which he possibly can right now, and
on account of failing to pass the two-thirds gender rule,
and he sees it fit because the life of parliament and that of the executive are tied together in the constitution, Now he could also decide to make a move and say President Uhuru should self-destruct as well.
Throw us into a state of constitutional crisis.
Yes, so our point is this. I think President Uhuru should have total lockdown on the judiciary. It is the only way to prevent social unrest and civil unrest from happening. Because should what we are seeing in Egypt continue.
Yeah, and of course, these are all worst case scenarios, but I think it's food for thought. It is.
Absolutely. These are all probabilities.
Precisely. Yeah.
So on a day that we didn't have a winning headline or a winning cartoon, but instead introduced you to the No Known Framework by Donald Rumsfeld, I will now turn it over to 2J to give us the
little quiz riddle of the day.
Riddle of
it's
the day.
A little breather away from Corona to distract you.
Yeah.
So for those of you who participated, the answer yesterday was a coffin.
Yeah.
So thank you for those of you who wrote your descriptions and texted them into us.
Yeah.
Today's question is, I have branches, but no fruit, trunk, or leaves. What am I?
Can I get a clue?
No. No. It is for our audience. It is not for your pleasure. So please, again, do write them in the comments down below. Text us your answers. We're constantly looking at our phones to discuss and talk with you. Yeah.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We are also on your TV screens. Find us on Paying Free to Air, Go TV, and Star Times. Have a good evening.